Boris Johnson seems to be on the path of victory with his Brexit strategy, as his Chief of Staff, Dominic Cummings, is planning to finally address a fatal flaw that Theresa May ignored and that arguably led to her demise. Newspaper columnist Rod Liddell suggested in his latest book, the new Prime Minister is turbocharging preparations to leave the EU without a deal on the 31st of October, according to senior cabinet ministers. During the weekend, Mr. Johnson sent out his cabinet for interviews across newspapers and broadcasters to make clear the UK will be heading for no deal unless EU leaders agree to replace the Irish backstop. New Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove, in charge of no deal preparations, said the government was operating on the assumption that the UK would leave without a deal on the 31st of October, and it was a very real prospect because EU leaders had not yet changed their minds about scrapping the contentious backstop. In a Sunday Times op-ed, he said that an agreement might not be struck with the EU by then, but there was a new clarity of mission. We will exit the EU on the 31st of October. No ifs, no buts, no more delay. On Theresa May's Brexit deal, Mr. Gove added, "You can't just reheat the dish that's been sent back and expect that will make it more palatable." As the 31st of October deadline draws closer, a new book by columnist Rod Liddell, The Great Betrayal, suggests Mr. Johnson could be indeed on the path of victory with his Brexit strategy. Last week, it emerged that Dominic Cummings, former campaign director of Vote Leave, is not only his key advisor but has also got a role in overseeing the recruitment of special advisors who counsel ministers. The move is part of a plan to centralize a political function that was once fulfilled by government departments. Mike Clancy, who represents specialist civil servants as General Secretary of the Prospect Union, said it plan could be catastrophic for Mr. Cummings and the government to rush into radical changes across Whitehall before Brexit. However, a restructuring of the civil service might be needed in order to deliver on the 2016 referendum as, according to Mr. Liddell, it is partially responsible for the deadlock and Mrs. May's unpopular withdrawal agreement. The newspaper columnist wrote, "The British civil service was a particular problem. It was from the start obvious that it was not neutral in the issue of the UK leaving the EU, as both cabinet ministers and Conservative backbenchers told me." Further, the PM's team were, in the words of one cabinet minister, essentially the same crowd who had handled David Cameron's visit to Brussels in early 2016 and come away with nothing. The distance between what the politicians wanted and what the civil servants thought they should get was made plain by the resignation to staff of the UK's EU ambassador Sir Ivan Rogers. "I hope you will continue to challenge ill-founded arguments and muddled thinking, and that you will never be afraid to speak the truth to those in power. I hope you will support each other in those difficult moments where you have to deliver messages that are disagreeable to those who need to hear them." Moreover, Mr. Liddell quoted the view of a pro-leave civil servant who in March 2019 told the Sunday Times, "It has become clear to me that the vast majority of civil servant support remain. From my own observations, I would estimate that the number to be well over 90%. This is worrying in itself and far from representative of the 52% of the population who voted for Brexit by giving key cabinet roles to leading Brexiteers and planning with Mr. Cummings a restructuring of the civil service. Mr. Johnson could therefore be closer to break the Brexit deadlock than his predecessor, Mrs. May, ever was."